Welcome to this explainer. Okay, if you're learning English, I have a feeling you are incredibly familiar with a very specific, honestly very frustrating problem. It's that massive gap between understanding English perfectly when you hear it and actually speaking it confidently when it's your turn to talk. Well, today, we're bringing you a highly practical, actionable solution to completely transform how you practice your speaking skills.
Okay, let's dive into this. Does this scenario ring a bell? You're listening to English, you totally get the podcasts, you can read the subtitles without missing a single beat. But then, the moment you find yourself in a real conversation, you just completely freeze. Your brain locks up, your sentences feel impossibly slow and awkward, and you just can't seem to articulate the thoughts you know are inside your head. You know the language, but your tongue just won't cooperate.
So to get you unstuck, we've got a clear roadmap for today. We'll start with the fluency freeze, then move into the shadowing technique, hit some real-world conversations, and finally wrap up with the fluency mindset. All right, let's kick things off with part 1, the fluency freeze, and exactly why we get stuck. So why exactly do we freeze up like that? Well, the issue usually happens right at the transition point. You're trying to move from simply understanding individual, isolated words to actually formulating whole ideas out loud. And that transition, it creates a massive mental bottleneck. The absolute biggest culprit creating that bottleneck is translating in your head. Think about it. When someone is speaking to you rapidly and you're trying to translate everything word for word, by the time you figured out what they said, they've already moved on to the next topic. It is just exhausting. Instead, as our source material brilliantly suggests, you need to treat an English conversation like listening to a song. You don't need to understand every single lyric to enjoy the melody or grasp the overall vibe, right? You want to listen for the main idea, not get bogged down in the individual parts. Moving right along to part 2, the shadowing technique, or becoming an echo. To completely smash that translation trap, we're going to use a tool called shadowing. Now, this practice only takes about 10 to 15 minutes a day. And the best part? It requires zero agonizing over complex grammar rules. But here is the secret. Shadowing is not just some basic repeat after me exercise where you wait for a long pause. No way. So the crucial point is that shadowing is active. You literally become the speaker's echo. You speak right with them, or maybe just a millisecond after them, aiming to perfectly match their stress, their melody, and their speed. You're mimicking the actual music of their speech. Doing this simultaneously starts to physically and mentally rewire your brain. It's a real game changer. Let's move to and see how this builds, because by mimicking speakers simultaneously, you're actually getting 3 massive benefits all at once. Number 1 is pronunciation. Your mouth physically gets used to making these new, unfamiliar English sounds. Number 2 is listening. Your brain actively trains itself to catch the tiny, subtle details of natural speech. And number 3, the holy grail, fluency. Over time, that agonizing internal translation bottleneck just disappears, and the English simply begins to flow. Now, to make this work, there are a few core rules of practice you absolutely gotta follow. First, you must speak out loud. Practicing in your head totally doesn't count. Second, pause the audio if you need to. It is perfectly fine to rewind. Third, aim for musical flow rather than stressing over a perfect accent right out of the gate. And finally, consistency is everything. Doing this for just 5 minutes every single day absolutely beats sitting down for a marathon 1-hour session once a month, for sure. All right, let's jump into part 3, real-world conversations and building your vocabulary toolkit. Now that we have the mechanics down, what should you actually be shadowing? Well, you need to practice vocabulary extracted directly from real everyday scenarios. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how much English changes depending entirely on your context. Just look at these phrases pulled straight from our source dialogues. If you're talking about a music festival like Coachella, you'd use slang, right? You'd say a performance hit differently or that the party was an absolute blast. But step into a professional conference, and suddenly you're asking, what's your take? Or admitting you're a little on edge before a big speech. And what if you go to the doctor? You need an entirely different set of tools, like knowing how to describe a throbbing headache or telling them you're feeling drained. Shadowing these specific scenarios builds a super versatile toolkit. And hey, we absolutely can't forget everyday errands. Mastering these seemingly small, everyday phrases is essential for really thriving in an English-speaking culture. We're talking about navigating small talk about the weather by saying something like, looks like a storm is brewing, or casually agreeing with a quick, fair enough. Or even just effortlessly asking, hey, which aisle is the granola in at the supermarket? These are the little micro interactions that make you feel truly fluent and fully connected to your environment. Which brings us to our final section, Part 4, the fluency mindset and overcoming that mental block. All the mechanical practice and vocabulary in the world really won't work without a psychological shift. For long-term success, we have got to adopt the right mindset. Our source material repeats a few very powerful affirmations, and this one right here is the anchor. I focus on connection, not perfection. Really think about it. The ultimate fundamental goal of learning any language is to connect with another human being. It's not to pass some flawless clinical grammar test. If you communicate your thought and the other person understands you, you've succeeded, period. We also need to completely reframe how we view failure. Mistakes are proof that I'm actually using my English. Seriously, every single time you stumble over a word or there's an awkward pause, it is not a disaster. It's actually a free, highly personalized lesson straight from real life, showing you exactly what you need to practice next. If you aren't making mistakes, well, you're probably just hiding. And this brilliantly illustrates one of the most liberating concepts in all of language learning. I let go of the idea of sounding like a native and focus on being understood. Listen, your unique accent is a part of your story. It tells people where you came from, and it shows that you were brave enough to learn something incredibly difficult. It is absolutely not a problem that needs to be erased or hidden. It's proof of your journey. And that brings us to our ultimate takeaway for this explainer. You do not need anyone's permission to call yourself an English speaker. If you use it, if you are putting in those 5 minutes of shadowing a day, you speak it. And that is enough. You deserve to take up space in conversations today, exactly as you are, because your thoughts matter right now. So I'll leave you with this question. If your imperfect English is already enough to connect with the world, what is stopping you from opening your mouth and taking up your rightful space in the conversation today?